Old Vex told them stories about when the supply ships came regularly, when we were part of the trade networks. They want to know when the ships are coming back. Cathara felt the familiar weight in her chest, the crushing responsibility of hope management that fell to every adult on their dying world. How do you explain to children that they've been forgotten, that in the grand calculations of galactic politics their lives had been rounded down to zero? Below them, through the viewport, their homeworld of Corveth turned slowly in space. Once it had been a jewel, azure oceans reflecting green continents covered in crystal formations that sang in harmony with their planet's magnetic field. The Corvani had been known throughout their sector as artists and musicians, their crystal symphonies sought after by collectors across the galaxy. Now the oceans had turned a sickly brown color, choked with the runoff from collapsed mining operations that no one could afford to clean up. The crystal forests that had given their world its music had been strip-mined during the desperate final years of the war, when both empires had demanded increased production quotas. The planet's surface was scarred with open wounds that would take centuries to heal. If they were given centuries, atmospheric readings are getting worse, Cathara reported, scanning the environmental sensors. Carbon dioxide levels up another 2% this cycle. The algae farms in Sector 7 failed completely yesterday. We're losing our ability to process oxygen faster than our population is declining. It was a race against time that they were losing. Every month, more Corvani died than were born. Every month, their life support systems degraded a little further. Every month, the silence from the galaxy grew heavier. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They were dying slowly and publicly, their distress signals broadcasted across known space every day. Their plight was documented, recorded, and filed away in databases across a dozen civilizations. Yet no one came. No one even acknowledged that they were worth saving. "Contact!" Jorak's voice suddenly cut through the familiar despair, his tone sharp with disbelief. "I'm detecting a ship dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge." Cathara spun around, her clawed feet skittering on the deck plating. Trajectory? Unknown configuration. The sensor profile doesn't match any known design in our databases. Jorak's scaled fingers danced over the controls, trying to get a clearer reading. It's strange. The ship appears to be heavily modified, possibly damaged. Wait, they're responding to our hail! For a moment, Cathara couldn't breathe. After 300 cycles of silence, someone was actually answering their call for help. She moved to the secondary console, her hands trembling as she activated the communication array. "Unknown vessel, this is Corveth Station. We've been trying to contact someone for help. Our world is dying, and we need assistance with evacuation or medical supplies or Corveth Station. This is the UES Wanderer." The voice that came through their speakers was unlike anything in their linguistic databases, rough, direct, with an accent that seemed to carry the weight of countless battles. "We're reading massive environmental distress on your planet. Do you require immediate assistance?" Cathara stared at the communication console as if it had started speaking prophecy. Did they just offer to help us?" she whispered to Jorak. "IUE's Wanderer. Yes, we desperately need assistance," she transmitted back, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We've been requesting aid from the Galactic Council for 300 cycles. Our ecosystem is collapsing, our population is dying, and we've been classified as non-essential by all major powers." There was a pause, not the cold silence they had grown accustomed to, but what seemed like consideration. When the voice returned, it carried a note of something they hadn't heard in years. Anger on their behalf. Non-essential? What kind of bureaucratic nonsense is that? Every sentient life is essential. The speaker seemed to be talking to someone else on their bridge. "Corveth Station, we're adjusting course for your orbital platform. We'll be with you in 6 hours. Can you hold out that long?" Yes, we can hold out," Cathara replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was holding out for. Could one ship really make a difference? "IUS Wanderer, what government do you represent? We've never heard of your configuration or designation." "We represent ourselves," came the reply. "Simple and direct. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Wanderer. We're from a species called humanity, and we don't leave people to die alone in the dark." Humanity. The name meant nothing to their databases, but the conviction in the captain's voice meant everything. As words spread through the station that someone, anyone, was coming to help them, Kithara watched her people transform before her eyes. Shoulders straightened, hope rekindled in eyes that had been dead for years. Children who had never seen an off-world ship pressed against viewports waiting for their first glimpse of salvation. But as the hours passed and the mysterious human ship grew larger on their sensors, Kithara couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. If these humans were so willing to help, so quick to respond to their distress, why had they never heard of them before? What kind of people traveled the galaxy offering assistance to the abandoned and forgotten? And, perhaps most troubling of all, if humanity was powerful enough to travel between stars and generous enough to help strangers, why weren't they part of the galactic community? What had driven them to the edges of known space, helping the forsaken worlds that everyone else ignored? The UES Wanderer was unlike anything in their databases, but as it grew closer, Kithara could see that it was a ship built for war. Scarred hull plating, weapon hardpoints that had been recently used, and modifications that spoke of desperation and ingenuity in equal measure. This wasn't a rescue ship or a diplomatic vessel. This was a warship whose crew had chosen to become saviors. As the massive human vessel settled into orbit around their dying world, Kithara realized that their long nightmare of abandonment might finally be ending. But she also sensed that whatever came next would change not just their fate, but the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The Forsaken were about to discover that they weren't alone, and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity didn't believe in writing off entire civilizations as acceptable losses. The question was, what would happen when an unstoppable force of human compassion met the immovable object of galactic indifference? Kithara was about to find out. The UES Wanderer dominated the viewport as it maneuvered closer to the Corvani station. Kithara had seen warships before, sleek, pristine vessels of the major galactic powers that projected authority and cold efficiency. This ship was different. Every piece of hull plating told a story of survival. Each modification spoke of necessity rather than design, and the overall impression was of something that had been through hell and emerged stronger for the experience. Captain Sarah Chen materialized on their communication screen, and Kithara was struck by how alien yet familiar she looked. Humans shared the bilateral symmetry common to most spacefaring species, but their features were unique. Smooth skin instead of scales, hair instead of crests, and eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience that spoke of old pain and stubborn hope. "Corvith Station requesting permission to dock," Captain Shen said, her image flickering slightly on their aging communication system. "We have medical supplies, environmental restoration equipment, and engineers who might be able to help stabilize your situation." "Permission granted," Kithara replied, though she exchanged worried glances with Jorak. Medical supplies they desperately needed, but environmental restoration? The damage to their world was catastrophic. What could one ship possibly do against the accumulated devastation of decades? "Captain Chen," Jorak interjected, "we should warn you that our situation may be beyond help. Our world has been strip-mined, our atmosphere is deteriorating, and our population is diminishing. We're grateful for any assistance, but we don't want you to waste resources on a hopeless cause." Captain Chen's expression hardened, and when she spoke again, there was steel in her voice. "Engineer Jorak, is it? Let me tell you something about humans. We specialize in hopeless causes. We have a saying, it's not over until it's over. And from where I'm sitting, you're all still breathing, which means it's not over." As the Wanderer's docking tube extended and connected with their station, Kithara felt a tremor run through the structure, not from the mechanical connection, but from the sheer mass of the human vessel. Up close, she could see details that their sensors had missed, repair patches that spoke of recent combat, weapon systems that had been retrofitted for non-military purposes, and most intriguingly, additional hull sections that appeared to have been salvaged from other ships. "This ship has seen war," Jorak observed quietly. "Recent war," Cathara agreed, noting scorch marks that couldn't have been more than a few months old. "Captain, if you don't mind me asking, where exactly did you come from? Our databases have no record of humanity or Earth in any star charts." Captain Chen's smile carried no humor. "That's because we're from outside your galaxy's little club. Earth is in what you probably classify as the Outer Rim territories, places too far away for your major powers to bother with. We've been exploring, trading, and occasionally fighting for survival out here for about 2 centuries now." The airlock cycled, and Cathara got her first look at humans in person. Captain Chen was shorter than most Corvani, but she moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. Behind her came a diverse group, a tall human with dark skin carrying what appeared to be medical equipment, a stocky individual whose arms were covered in technical modifications that suggested cybernetic enhancement, and others whose varied appearances spoke of a species comfortable with diversity. Dr. Emmanuel Okafor. The tall human introduced himself, already scanning the station's atmosphere with a handheld device. "I'm reading elevated toxin levels in your air supply. When did you last have a full environmental system check?" We haven't been able to afford full diagnostics for over 50 cycles," Cathara admitted, embarrassed by their station's deteriorated state. Dr. Okafor frowned at his readings. "Captain, we're looking at systemic failure across multiple life support systems. This isn't just wear and tear, this is equipment running far beyond its designed operational parameters." "Which means?" Captain Chen asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "They're slowly suffocating," the cybernetically enhanced human said bluntly. "I'm Chief Engineer Torres. This station should have been condemned or completely overhauled decades ago. The fact that you're still alive is a testament to either remarkable luck or remarkable stubbornness." "Both," Jorak said with bitter humor. "We've been maintaining this place with spare parts and prayers for longer than I care to calculate." Captain Chen looked around the station's main corridor, taking in the patched walls, the intermittent lighting, and the subtle signs of a population making do with far too little. "Show me everything," she said simply. "The good, the bad, and the completely hopeless. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Over the next several hours, Cathara led the human team through their dying world's orbital outpost. Dr. Okafor took atmospheric readings, tested their water supply, and ran medical scans on volunteers that revealed the slow progression of environmental poisoning that was affecting their entire population. Chief Engineer Torres examined their life support systems with the fascination of someone seeing archaeological artifacts that were somehow still functioning. But it was Captain Chen's reactions that puzzled Cathara most. Where she expected sympathy or pity, she saw anger. Where she expected resignation in the face of overwhelming problems, she saw calculation and planning. The human captain wasn't looking at them as victims to be mourned, but as people to be saved. "Your environmental problems are solvable," Dr. Okafor announced as they concluded their tour in the station's small medical facility. "Difficult and expensive, but solvable. We can neutralize the atmospheric toxins, restore your soil composition, and even begin regenerating your ocean ecosystems." "With what resources?" Cathara asked. "Even if you have the technology, surely the cost would be astronomical." "That depends," Captain Chen said, "on whether you count the cost in credits or in lives. The Galactic Council might look at your world and see an expensive restoration project with no return on investment. We look at it and see people who deserve to live." Chief Engineer Torres activated a holographic display that showed a detailed scan of their planet. "The damage looks worse than it is because it's concentrated in specific areas. Your mining operations were poorly managed. They went for maximum extraction with no thought for environmental impact. But the good news is that your world's underlying ecosystem is remarkably resilient." "What are you suggesting?" Jorak asked, hope and skepticism warring in his voice. "Atmospheric processors," Dr. Okafor explained. We can deploy orbital platforms that will scrub toxins from your air and begin restoring proper atmospheric composition. It'll take about 5 years to see significant results, 10 to 15 for full restoration. Soil regeneration systems, Torres added. We seed your damaged continents with engineered bacteria that break down industrial pollutants and restore natural mineral balance. Combined with replanted crystal forests, your world could be singing again within a generation. Barriers, Captain Chen concluded. We create massive filtration systems at strategic points that slowly process contaminated water, while allowing marine life to recover in protected zones. Cathara stared at the holographic projection, watching as the humans' proposals transformed their dying world into something that looked almost like the paradise she remembered from her childhood. This is amazing, but surely you understand we have nothing to offer in return. We're not part of any trade network, we have no valuable resources left, and our population is too small to provide significant labor. Captain Chen turned away from the display to look directly at her. Cathara, let me ask you something. If you found a child drowning in a river, would you demand payment before pulling them out? Of course not, but no buts. Some things you do because they're right, not because they're profitable. Captain Chen's expression softened slightly. Besides, you do have something to offer. Your people are artists, musicians, creators. Once your world is restored, you'll be making beauty again. The galaxy needs more beauty. But the cost, Jorak protested. Even if you have this technology, deploying it on a planetary scale, it would cost more than most worlds' annual budgets. Chief Engineer Torres laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both bitter and amused. You want to know where we get the resources? We take them from people who have too much. Pirates, slavers, corrupt officials who profit from others' suffering, they all have shiny ships and expensive equipment that can be repurposed for better uses. You're pirates? Cathara asked, alarmed. There's a difference. Pirates take from whoever they want. We take from people who deserve it and give to people who need it. Think of us as redistributive justice. Dr. Okafor pulled up another display, this one showing the UES Wanderer's cargo manifest. Atmospheric processors taken from a Zelthran slave ship. Soil regeneration equipment confiscated from a Federation planet that was using it to terraform worlds while ignoring their own environmental refugees. Ocean purification systems liberated from a corrupt governor who was hoarding them while his people drank poisoned water. Every piece of equipment we carry, Captain Chen explained, came from someone who had the resources to help people but chose not to. We just changed their minds about sharing. Cathara felt a mixture of admiration and concern. These humans were offering salvation, but they were also admitting to being criminals by galactic law. Won't this bring attention from the authorities? If you deploy all this equipment here, someone will notice. Let them notice, Captain Chen said with a cold smile. We've been playing cat and mouse with both empires for years. They classify us as terrorists, pirates, and worse, but they can't catch us, and they can't stop us from helping people they've abandoned. Why? The question came from Cathara's heart before her mind could stop it. Why risk everything for strangers? Why care about people you've never met? Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment, looking out through the viewport at the dying world below. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old grief, because someone did it for us once. When Earth was dying and the galactic powers turned their backs on humanity, calling us too primitive and not yet ready for membership, we thought we were alone. Then a ship appeared, not from any major power, but from a small civilization that chose to help because... What happened to them? Jorak asked quietly. They were destroyed for violating non-interference laws, Dr. Okafor said, his voice heavy with remembered loss. The Galactic Council made an example of them to discourage others from getting involved in primitive worlds problems. But they saved us, Chief Engineer Torres added, gave us the technology we needed to heal our world and reach for the stars. We promised we'd pay it forward. Captain Chen turned back to face them. So that's what we do. We find the forsaken worlds, the forgotten people, the ones written off as acceptable losses, and we prove that no one is expendable. Kethara felt tears gathering in her eyes, the first tears of hope she'd shed in decades. "When can you start?" "We already have." Captain Chen smiled. "While we've been talking, my crew has been deploying atmospheric monitoring buoys around your planet. Tomorrow we begin setting up the first purification platforms. But I need you to understand, once we start this process, there's no going back quietly. The major powers will notice. They'll send investigators, and eventually they'll send warships." "Are you saying we'll be putting you in danger?" Kethara asked. "No," Captain Chen replied. "I'm saying you'll be declaring yourselves free. Free from abandonment, free from being written off, free from waiting for permission to exist. The question is, are you ready to stop being victims and start being survivors?" Looking around at her people, at Jorak's determined expression, at the hope beginning to bloom in every face, Kethara realized they'd already made their choice the moment they'd sent out their first distress signal 300 cycles ago. They'd been crying out for someone to prove they mattered. Now that someone had arrived. "We're ready," she said simply. "Good," Captain Chen nodded, "because tomorrow we start saving your world, and may the universe help anyone who tries to stop us." 6 weeks had passed since the UES Wanderer arrived at Corvith, and Kethara could hardly recognize her world. Where once brown, poisoned oceans had lapped against dead shores, massive purification platforms now hummed with quiet efficiency, their bioluminescent indicators showing steady progress as contaminated water slowly cleared. The sky, which had been a sickly yellow-brown for as long as she could remember, was beginning to show patches of blue for the first time in her lifetime. Standing on the observation deck of what Captain Chen had designated as Forward Operating Base Alpha, formerly their deteriorating orbital station, now reinforced and expanded with human engineering, Kethara watched shuttles move between the surface and orbit in a constant stream of activity. Each vessel carried either equipment down to the planet or samples back up for analysis as Dr. Okafor's team mapped every aspect of their world's ecological recovery. "The atmospheric composition has improved 15% in just 6 weeks, Dr. Okafor reported, joining her at the viewport. His dark skin glistened with perspiration. The human had been working 18-hour days since their arrival, seemingly driven by an inexhaustible need to help. "At this rate, we'll have breathable air quality restored in 8 months instead of the original 5-year estimate." "How is that possible?" Kethara asked, though she'd learned enough about human technology to suspect the answer involved some form of barely controlled recklessness. "Your chief engineer Torres has been creative with the atmospheric processors," Dr. Okafor said diplomatically. "She's running them at 130% of rated capacity." "And Captain Chen approved this?" "Captain Chen suggested it," Dr. Okafor laughed. "Humans don't do anything halfway, especially when lives are at stake. We've decided that equipment can be replaced, but your people can't wait years for clean air." Through the viewport, Kethara could see the latest addition to their growing fleet, a massive cargo vessel that had arrived 3 days ago. Unlike the Wanderer, this ship bore the clean lines and pristine hull of a major corporation. It had been broadcasting automated distress signals when it dropped out of hyperspace, its cargo holds full of terraforming equipment, bound for a Zelthran colony world. "The captain of that vessel seemed remarkably understanding about your salvage operation," Kethara observed. Dr. Okafor's smile became slightly predatory. "Captain Morrison was very cooperative once we explained that his cargo was desperately needed for humanitarian purposes, especially after Chief Torres demonstrated what our boarding torpedoes could do to his engine compartments." "So you stole it. We liberated it," Dr. Okafor corrected. "There's a difference. That equipment was going to terraform a garden world for Zelthran aristocrats who already have a dozen garden worlds each. We're using it to save the only world your people have. Some redistributions of resources are simply mathematical corrections to an unjust universe." Kethara had stopped being surprised by human moral flexibility weeks ago. She'd watched Captain Chen's crew perform acts of breathtaking compassion alongside operations that could only be described as piracy. They seemed to exist in an ethical gray zone where the ends not only justified the means but demanded them. Kithara to the communication center, Priority 1. Jorak's voice came over the station's intercom system, carrying an urgency that made her scale crest rise in alarm. She found Jorak hunched over his console, his four-fingered hands dancing across controls with practiced efficiency. Multiple displays showed incoming vessel signatures at the edge of their system, and none of them looked friendly. "What are we looking at?" Kithara asked, though the tactical display was already telling her everything she needed to know. 3 ships military configuration, Jorak reported. 2 Zelthran destroyers and 1 Federation cruiser. They dropped out of hyperspace simultaneously at maximum sensor range. Coordinated approach definitely not a coincidence. They're here about the missing cargo ship? That would be my guess. The Zelftrans are probably upset about their terraforming equipment, and the Federation likely wants to investigate reports of pirate activity in their buffer zone. Captain Chen arrived in the communications center at a run, her uniform still showing signs of the engineering work she'd been doing in the lower decks. "Talk to me, Jorak. What's our tactical situation?" 3 warships approaching in standard patrol formation. They'll be in weapons range in 4 hours at current velocity. Jorak brought up a detailed analysis of the incoming vessels. 2 Zelthran sword-class destroyers, fast, heavily armed, designed for quick strikes. 1 Federation Perseus-class heavy cruiser, slower but massive firepower and heavy shielding. Captain Shen studied the display with the calm focus of someone who'd faced impossible odds before. "They're not coming to negotiate. 3 ships from different powers arriving together means this was planned at higher levels. Someone's decided to make an example of us." "Can the Wanderer fight them?" Kithara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The Wanderer is tough, and we've got some tricks they won't expect," Captain Chen replied. "But 3-to-1 odds against purpose-built warships? In a straight fight, we lose." "So we run?" Jorak asked. "We can't run," Captain Chen said simply. "Half our equipment is deployed on the surface." Dr. Reese, Okafor's atmospheric processors are at critical points in their operation cycles. Shutting them down now would set your world's recovery back by years, and frankly, running would just prove their point that we're criminals who strike and flee. "Then what do we do?" Kithara asked. Captain Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "We remind them why humanity doesn't back down from fights, even when we're outgunned. Jorak, open a channel to all 3 vessels." "Channel open, Captain. Zelthran and Federation vessels. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Wanderer. You are approaching a world under humanitarian protection. State your intentions." The reply came from the Federation cruiser, the voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience. "IUU's Wanderer. This is Captain Vexstar of the Federation vessel Righteous Purpose. You are suspected of piracy, theft of military equipment, and violation of established territorial boundaries. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. Negative, Righteous Purpose. We are conducting lawful humanitarian operations under the authority of the Corvani government. You have no jurisdiction here." "There is no Corvani government," the Zelthran destroyer captain interjected, his translator rendering his words with mechanical precision. "Corvaith was classified as defunct territory under Treaty Section 847 Alpha. No legitimate authority exists on that world." Captain Chen looked at Kithara with raised eyebrows. "Kithara, as the senior Corvani official present, do you formally request protection from the United Earth Navy?" Kithara felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Whatever she said next would determine not just their immediate fate, but the future of her entire people. Yes. On behalf of all surviving Corvani, I formally request protection and assistance from humanity." "Jorak, transmit that request on all channels," Captain Chen ordered. "Federation and Zelthran vessels. You've just heard the legitimate government of Corveth formally request our assistance. Any attack on our vessels or this world now constitutes an act of war against both Earth and the Corvani people. Earth is not a recognized member of the Galactic Council," Captain Vexstar replied. "Your claims of governmental authority are meaningless." And that, Captain Chen said quietly, is exactly the problem. She activated the ship-wide communication system, her voice carrying to every human aboard the Wanderer and its support vessels. All hands, this is the captain. We've got 3 warships incoming with hostile intent. They seem to think that because Earth isn't part of their little club, we don't have the right to help people who are dying. They're about to learn differently. Turning back to the communication console, Captain Chen's voice took on a tone that Kithara had never heard before, something between a warning and a promise. Federation and Zelfran vessels, this is your final warning. The people of Corveth have requested our protection. We're going to give it to them. I suggest you reconsider your approach. IUA's Wanderer, you are outgunned 3-1. Captain Vexstar responded. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to interstellar law. 3-1. Captain Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jorak, how many distress calls have we answered in this sector over the past 6 months? Jorak consulted his logs. 17 worlds, Captain. All of them abandoned by the major powers. And how many of those worlds ask us to stay in touch? All of them, Captain. Captain Chen activated a new communication frequency, one that reached far beyond their local system. This is Captain Sarah Chen, calling all free worlds in the outer territories. We have a situation at Corveth. 3 warships from the so-called major powers are threatening humanitarian operations. Anyone who believes in the right of forgotten people to exist might want to take notice. The communication board lit up like a festival display. Kithara watched in amazement as ship after ship responded to the call. Some were human vessels like the Wanderer, but others carried unfamiliar configurations and languages she'd never heard before. UEA Darwin responding. We'll be at your location in 3 hours. Free Ship Vengeance acknowledging. Those Federation bastards destroyed our colony. Time to return the favor. Corellan Defense Force standing by. The Corellans remember who helped them when the Empires called them economically non-viable. 6 hospital ships and 4 escorts en route to your position. Within minutes, the tactical display showed more than 20 ships converging on their system. Not just human vessels, but representatives from dozens of species that had been written off, abandoned, or classified as non-essential by the major galactic powers. IUA's Wanderer. Captain Vexstar's voice came again, but now it carried a note of uncertainty. We detect multiple ships approaching your position. This is a clear violation of territorial sovereignty. Whose territory? Captain Chen asked sweetly. According to your own treaty, this is unclaimed space. And according to galactic law, any government has the right to request assistance from allies. The Corvani government has allies now. Kethara stared at the tactical display as their 3-ship disadvantage transformed into a 20-plus ship advantage. How many worlds have you helped? She asked. Not enough, Captain Chen replied, but apparently enough to matter. Okafor joined them in the communication center, his medical scanner still in his hand. Captain, I'm reading massive stress indicators from the Corvani population. They're terrified those ships will stop our work. They won't, Captain Chen said with absolute certainty, because sometimes when you do the right thing long enough, you discover you're not alone. And sometimes the forgotten people you've helped remember how to help each other. She opened the channel one final time. Federation and Zelthran vessels, you now have 2 choices. You can acknowledge Corvani's sovereignty and withdraw from this system, or you can explain to your respective governments why you started a war with 20-plus worlds because you couldn't stand the idea of someone saving people you'd written off as disposable. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Captain Vexstar's voice returned, tight with suppressed fury. Federation vessel Righteous Purpose withdrawing from the Corveth system. This matter will be reported to appropriate authorities. Zelthran destroyers Blade and Honor withdrawing, came the second response. This interference will not be forgotten. As the 3 warships changed course and departed the system, Kethara felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries of abandonment, the knowledge that her people were not alone. Captain, she said quietly, For everything, Captain Chen looked out at the growing fleet of vessels arriving to support their world. Ships from species they'd never heard of, all coming together because someone had finally said that abandoned worlds mattered. "Don't thank me yet," Captain Chen replied, "because now comes the hard part. Word of this will spread. The major powers will realize they're losing control of the outer territories. And when they do, they're going to send more than 3 ships." "How many more?" Cathara asked. Captain Chen's smile was grim but determined. "All of them if necessary. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today we saved your world and proved that sometimes the forgotten can become the unforgettable." Looking out at the fleet gathering in their defense, Cathara realized that they'd witnessed more than a humanitarian rescue. They'd seen the birth of something new, a coalition of the Forsaken, united by the simple belief that every life mattered. The galaxies abandoned had found each other, and they were no longer willing to stay quiet about their abandonment. 3 months after the confrontation that had driven away the Federation and Zelthran warships, Corveth had transformed from a dying world into something that resembled a military command center. The orbital station, now designated as Liberty Station by unanimous vote of its inhabitants, buzzed with activity as representatives from 47 different worlds coordinated what the major powers were calling the Outer Territories Rebellion and what Captain Chen preferred to call aggressive humanitarian. Cooperation, quote, with Thera, quote, stood in what had once been a storage compartment and was now the Situation Room, watching as holographic displays showed ship movements across 3 sectors. The transformation still amazed her, not just of their station, but of herself. 6 months ago, she'd been a communications officer on a dying world, sending desperate messages into the void. Now, J.D. Otto survising as the liaison between the Corvani government and what the major powers were calling the Forsaken Alliance. Intelligence reports confirm a massive military buildup in the Zelthran core systems, announced Commander Torres, who had been promoted to Chief of Operations for the growing fleet. At least 60 ships of the line, plus support vessels. They're calling it a piracy suppression operation. "What about the Federation?" asked Captain Hickstar, a Corellan whose people had been abandoned when their agricultural world proved insufficient to feed both their population and export quotas. His species resembled elongated humans with chitinous plates instead of skin, but Cathara had learned that appearances meant little when it came to determination. "The Federation is taking a more subtle approach, Dr. Rhea." O'Coffer reported from his position at the medical station. "They're cutting off medical supplies to any world that's requested assistance from the Alliance. They're also blocking access to interstellar communication networks for security reasons." Captain Chen paced around the holographic display, her expression grim. "They're trying to force our allied worlds to choose between medical care and freedom. Classic Federation strategy. If they can't beat you militarily, they'll try to make you too sick to fight." "It won't work," declared Captain Yen of the Mercy Fleet, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been fighting for forgotten worlds longer than most. "We've been stockpiling medical supplies for months. Every world they cut off just becomes more dependent on us and less tied to them." Cathara studied the tactical display, noting the steady stream of ships arriving at their coordinates. "How many vessels do we have now?" 237 combat vessels of various classes, Commander Torres replied, plus support ships, medical vessels, supply craft, and civilian transports. The largest fleet of independent vessels ever assembled, and every one of them here because someone decided they'd had enough of being forgotten, Captain Chen added. "The question is, what do we do with all this righteous anger?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. In the months since the Wanderer's arrival at Corveth, word had spread across the galaxy's forgotten territories. Abandoned worlds had begun reaching out to each other, forming communication networks independent of the major powers. Trade agreements had been established between worlds that the galactic community had written off as economically worthless. Most importantly, they'd begun to see themselves not as isolated failures, but as part of something larger. "The Zelthrans will attack within the week," Captain Hickstar said, his chitinous plates clicking nervously. The 60 ships against our 200 sounds favorable, but their vessels are purpose-built warships with unified command and coordination. We're a collection of modified cargo ships, obsolete patrol craft, and converted civilian vessels with crews that have never worked together. Don't forget the human ships, Captain Chen smiled. We may not have numbers, but we've got experience fighting impossible odds. And we've got something the major powers lost a long time ago. We actually believe in what we're fighting for. Dr. Okafor activated a new display showing the medical situation across their allied worlds. There's another factor we need to consider. The Federation's medical blockade is already showing results. We're seeing increased mortality rates on 7 worlds. If this continues, our allies will be forced to choose between supporting us and watching their people die. Then we make sure it doesn't continue, Captain Chen said flatly. Torres, how long would it take to organize a coordinated strike on Federation medical supply depots? Captain, that would be an act of war, Cathara protested, though she was surprised to find herself considering the tactical possibilities rather than the moral implications. We're already at war, Captain Chen replied. The major powers declared it when they decided our people weren't worth saving. The only question is whether we fight back or let them slowly murder our worlds with bureaucratic neglect. Commander Torres brought up a new display showing Federation supply lines. I can have strike teams ready in 48 hours. Hit them fast, take only medical supplies and humanitarian aid, leave everything else untouched. Make it clear we're not common pirates. Do it, Captain Chen ordered. But I want medical personnel on every strike team. Dr. Okafor, can you coordinate with the Mercy Fleet to ensure proper handling of seized medical supplies? Already working on it, Dr. Okafor confirmed. We've also been developing relationships with sympathetic contacts within the Federation Medical Corps. There are people inside their system who are disgusted by the blockade policy. Cathara watched the plans take shape with a mixture of admiration and concern. The humans' approach to problem-solving seemed to involve finding the most direct path to their goal and then bulldozing through any obstacles regardless of consequences. It was terrifyingly effective, but it also escalated every situation into a potential crisis. Captain Chen, she said carefully, attacking Federation supply lines will give them justification for military action against all our worlds. Are we prepared for that level of escalation? Captain Chen turned to face her, and Cathara saw something in the human's eyes that she'd been glimpsing more often lately. A cold calculation that spoke of someone who'd moved far beyond humanitarian rescue into something approaching revolution. Cathara, let me ask you something. Before we arrived, how many of your people were dying each day? Approximately 15 to 20. And how many are dying now? None. Our population has actually grown by 300 individuals since the atmospheric restoration began. So in terms of lives saved versus lives potentially lost, we're ahead of the game, Captain Chen concluded. The Federation's medical blockade will kill thousands across our allied worlds. If breaking their supply lines saves those lives, then it's not escalation, it's mathematics. But where does it end? Cathara pressed. They escalate, we escalate, they escalate further. Eventually, we're fighting a total war against powers that control thousands of worlds. It ends, Captain Chen said quietly, when they acknowledge that the people they've abandoned have the right to exist, when they stop treating entire civilizations as acceptable losses, when they learn that there are consequences for writing off worlds full of sentient beings. A new voice interrupted the discussion. Permission to speak? Everyone turned to see a young human ensign standing in the doorway, one of the recent recruits from worlds that had joined their cause. Cathara recognized him as Michael Park, a communications specialist whose home world had been destroyed by industrial accidents that could have been prevented with proper Federation oversight. Granted, Captain Chen said. Ma'am, I've been monitoring communications from the major powers. They're not just mobilizing military forces, they're preparing propaganda campaigns. They're going to portray this as a terrorist uprising, claim we're threatening galactic stability, and use it as justification for increased military control over all outer territory worlds. Captain Yuan leaned forward in her chair. Meaning they're going to use our rebellion as an excuse to crack down even harder on worlds that haven't joined us yet. Exactly, Ensign Park confirmed. They'll paint every act of humanitarian aid as terrorism, every rescue operation as piracy, and every attempt at self-determination as a threat to galactic order. Dr. Okafor shook his head grimly. So if we fight back, we prove we're dangerous. If we don't fight back, our people die from their blockades. Classic imperial logic, the victims are always responsible for the violence used against them. Cathara felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. How had they gone from receiving humanitarian aid to planning military operations against galactic superpowers? When had saving her people transformed into potentially endangering countless others? There's another option, Captain Chen said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. We changed the game entirely. What do you mean? Commander Torres asked. Captain Chen activated a new display, this one showing communication intercepts from across the galaxy. For the past month, I've been receiving messages from worlds inside both the Federation and Zelthran Empire. Not outer territory worlds, core systems, established colonies, even member worlds of the Galactic Council. The display scrolled through dozens of messages, all with similar themes: requests for humanitarian aid, reports of government neglect, pleas for assistance with environmental or medical crises that their own governments were ignoring. The dirty secret, Captain Chen continued, is that the major powers don't just abandon outer territory worlds. They abandon any world that becomes inconvenient, even their own. Industrial accidents on member worlds get covered up. Medical emergencies on agricultural colonies get ignored if they might disrupt food supplies. Environmental disasters on mining worlds are classified as acceptable losses if cleanup would be expensive. You're suggesting we expand our operations to include worlds inside the major powers? Captain Hickstar asked, his chitinous plates clicking rapidly with agitation. I'm suggesting we prove that the problem isn't just outer territory worlds being forgotten, Captain Chen replied. I'm suggesting we show the galaxy that the major powers have been abandoning their own people for centuries, and it's time someone held them accountable. Cathara stared at the display, realizing the full scope of what Captain Chen was proposing. Not just a rebellion of forgotten worlds, but a galactic-wide humanitarian movement that transcended political boundaries. That's not rebellion, she said slowly. That's revolution. Yes, Captain Chen agreed simply. Because sometimes the only way to save the people you care about is to change the entire system that's killing them. The Situation Room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. They'd started as desperate people accepting help from strangers. Now they were discussing the overthrow of galactic civilization itself. The Zelthran fleet will be here in 5 days, Commander Torres said finally. Whatever we decide to do, we need to survive that first. We'll survive, Captain Chen said with absolute certainty. Because we have something they don't. People fighting for their lives instead of their careers. And after we survive, we're going to show the galaxy what happens when the forgotten decide they're tired of being forgotten. Cathara looked around the room at the faces of people from dozens of different worlds, all united by the simple belief that their lives mattered. 6 months ago, they'd been dying alone on forgotten worlds. Now they were planning to challenge the fundamental order of galactic civilization. When the Zelthrans arrive, she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice, they're going to discover that we're not just pirates or terrorists or rebels. We're the future of galactic civilization, a future where no one gets left behind. Captain Chen smiled, and for the first time since Cathara had met her, it was an expression of pure hope instead of grim determination. Now you're thinking like a human, she said. And in that moment, Cathara realized that perhaps humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their technology or their military prowess. Perhaps it was their absolute refusal to accept that anyone was expendable, combined with their terrifying willingness to fight the entire universe to prove it. The Zelthran fleet was coming. But they would find that the Forsaken worlds were no longer alone, no longer quiet, and no longer willing to accept abandonment as the price of galactic stability. The revolution was about to begin. The Zelthran Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace like a storm front of destruction, 60 vessels strong and arranged in the perfect battle formations that had conquered half the galaxy. Admiral Kethvar, commanding from the bridge of the massive dreadnought Eternal Glory, surveyed the tactical display with satisfaction. This would be a simple operation: destroy the pirate fleet, occupy the rebellious worlds, and demonstrate to the galaxy that the established order would not tolerate challenges from inferior species. What he saw when his sensors fully mapped the Corvette system made him pause. "Tactical analysis," he ordered, his segmented insect-like features rigid with concentration. "Admiral, we're detecting 417 vessels in defensive positions around the planet," his tactical officer reported, mandibles clicking nervously. "Configuration analysis indicates, sir, we're looking at representatives from at least 60 different species, including several we don't have in our databases." Admiral Kethvar felt the first stirring of unease. Intelligence had suggested they would face perhaps 50 ships of questionable quality. This looked like the largest gathering of independent vessels in recorded history. "Open communications with the lead vessel," he ordered. Time to end this nonsense before it spreads further. Aboard Liberty Station, Kethara watched the massive Zelthran fleet deploy into attack formation. Despite the odds in their favor, she could feel the tension radiating from every being on the station. These weren't just warships they were facing. These were representatives of an empire that had conquered worlds and enslaved species for 1,000 years. Incoming communication from the Zelthran flagship, Jorak announced from his expanded communications station. "Put it on screen," Captain Chen replied, but Kethara noticed she'd positioned herself carefully so the camera would show both her and representatives from a dozen different species behind her. This wasn't going to be a military surrender, it was going to be a diplomatic statement. Admiral Kethvar's image filled the screen, his compound eyes reflecting the bridge lights like fractured jewels. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zelthran Imperial Fleet. You are ordered to disperse immediately and surrender all stolen property to Imperial custody. Any resistance will be met with decisive force." Captain Chen stepped forward, and Kethara was struck by how small she looked compared to the imposing alien admiral. But when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd never backed down from a fight. "Admiral Kethvar, I am Captain Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the Free Worlds Alliance. We are conducting lawful humanitarian operations under the sovereign authority of the member governments. You are trespassing in sovereign space and threatening non-combatant medical operations." Admiral Kethvar's mandibles spread in what Kethara had learned was the Zelthran equivalent of a dismissive laugh. "There are no sovereign governments here. These worlds were classified as defunct under the Treaty of Galactic Stability. Your so-called alliance has no legal standing. The Treaty of Galactic Stability was signed without consulting the populations of the worlds it abandoned," Captain Chen replied evenly. "We reject the authority of any treaty that treats sentient beings as disposable assets." "You reject the authority of galactic law itself," Admiral Kethvar countered, "which makes you criminals. I offer you one final chance to surrender before we demonstrate why the Zelthran Empire has maintained order for a millennium." Captain Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut space itself. "Admiral, before you fire the first shot, you might want to consider the broader implications of your actions. Jorak, please activate the Galactic Broadcast Network." Suddenly, the communication channel expanded to include dozens of additional screens. Kethara watched in amazement as representatives from major core worlds, member species of the Galactic Council, and even high-ranking officials within the Federation and Zelthran Empire itself appeared on the display. "Admiral Kethvar," Captain Chen continued, "meet the Galactic Truth Coalition. Over the past 3 months, we've been in communication with representatives from across known space. People who've watched their own governments ignore humanitarian crises, abandon environmental disasters, and classify entire populations as acceptable losses. The galaxy is watching this confrontation. The question is, what are you going to teach them about imperial justice?" Admiral Kethvar's compound eyes shifted rapidly between the screens, recognizing several faces that shouldn't have been supporting a rebel alliance. This is impossible. These are member worlds, loyal citizens. These are people who've watched their governments write off suffering as a necessary cost of stability, interrupted Councillor Vaxani from the Zelthron Agricultural District, one of the Empire's core systems. Admiral, my district has been requesting aid for industrial contamination for 15 years. Our children are dying from preventable diseases while the Imperial Senate debates whether cleanup costs are economically justified. These humans showed up and fixed our problems in 6 weeks. The Federation refused to provide medical aid for a plague outbreak on Kepler Colony, added Dr. Miranda Santos, whose uniform identified her as a Federation colonial medical officer, said it wasn't strategically significant enough to justify the expense. The Free Worlds Alliance sent 3 hospital ships and saved 2 million lives. Admiral Kethvar realized he was no longer looking at a simple piracy suppression mission. This had become a galactic political crisis being broadcast live to billions of beings across known space. This is clearly an elaborate deception, he declared, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Terrorist propaganda designed to undermine lawful authority. Is it? Captain Chen activated another display showing detailed records of every humanitarian operation the Alliance had conducted. Here's our complete operational history, Admiral. Every world we've helped, every life we've saved, every environmental disaster we've prevented. All of it broadcast on open channels, all of it documented by independent observers. If helping people is terrorism, then yes, we're terrorists. Dr. Okafor stepped into view, his medical scanner still in hand from his latest rounds checking on Corvani recovery patients. Admiral, I'm a doctor. My oath is to preserve life wherever I find it. In the past year, the Free Worlds Alliance has saved more lives than your empire and the Federation combined. Are you really going to open fire on hospital ships and environmental restoration platforms? Admiral Kethvar found himself in an impossible position. He'd come to crush a rebellion, but the rebels had turned the operation into a galactic referendum on imperial policy. Destroying them now would look like an attack on humanitarian workers in front of billions of witnesses from his own empire. You're using civilian shields, he accused, hiding behind medical operations to conduct military activities. We're not hiding behind anything, Captain Chen replied. Our medical operations are our military activities. Our environmental restoration work is our declaration of war against indifference. Our refugee assistance programs are our weapons against abandonment. She gestured to the tactical display, showing the positions of their fleet. Admiral, you see 400 ships. We see 400 worlds that decided they mattered. You see a rebel alliance. We see the future of galactic civilization, one where no one gets left behind. Kethara watched the confrontation with growing amazement. Captain Chen had somehow transformed a military standoff into a philosophical debate about the nature of civilization itself, and she was winning. The Zelthran Empire has maintained order for 1,000 years, Admiral Kethvar said, but his voice now carried a note of uncertainty. Order built on the suffering of the forgotten, Captain Chen replied. Order that depends on calling some lives more valuable than others. Order that treats entire worlds as acceptable losses when they become inconvenient. She stepped closer to the communication pickup, her eyes boring into the camera. Admiral, your empire abandoned these worlds when they stopped being profitable. The Federation wrote them off when they became politically inconvenient. But we came when they called for help. Which of us sounds like the real civilization to you? The silence stretched across space as Admiral Kethvar struggled with a decision that would define not just this battle but potentially the future of galactic politics. Behind him, Kethara could see Zelthran officers exchanging uncertain glances. This wasn't the simple military operation they'd been promised. Finally, the Admiral spoke again. Captain Chen, the Zelthran Imperial Fleet cannot simply withdraw without achieving our mission objectives. What are your mission objectives, Admiral? Captain Chen asked. To restore order? Order is working hospitals saving lives instead of letting people die because they can't afford treatment. Order is clean air and water instead of environmental collapse because cleanup isn't profitable. Order is civilizations that judge themselves by how they treat their weakest members, not their strongest. Admiral Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Captain Shen, the Zelthran Imperial Fleet hereby recognizes the sovereign authority of the Free Worlds Alliance to conduct humanitarian operations in disputed territories. We will monitor the situation to ensure galactic stability. Kethara felt her knees go weak with relief. They'd faced down an Imperial fleet and won, not through superior firepower, but through superior morality broadcast to the entire galaxy. "Thank you, Admiral," Captain Chen replied graciously. "The Alliance stands ready to provide humanitarian assistance to any world that requests it, including worlds within the Zelthran Empire that might require aid their government can't or won't provide." Admiral Kethvar's mandibles twitched, a sign that he understood exactly what she was offering and what it meant. For Imperial authority, the Empire will consider such offers as circumstances warrant. As the communication ended and the Zelthran fleet began withdrawing, Kethara realized they'd witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time in millennia, the major powers had been forced to back down not by military force but by moral authority. "Captain," she said quietly, "what happens now?" Captain Chen looked out at the massive fleet of ships representing dozens of forgotten worlds. "Now we prove that civilization doesn't have to be built on the suffering of the abandoned. We show the galaxy what happens when people who care about each other decide to work together. And we demonstrate that the most powerful force in the universe isn't military might or economic control, it's the simple refusal to let anyone suffer alone." Dr. Okafor joined them at the viewport, watching as ships from across the galaxy began coordinating relief operations for their next humanitarian mission. "The Federation and Zelthran Empire will adapt," he warned. "They'll find new ways to maintain control while appearing to embrace humanitarian principles." "Let them try," Captain Shen smiled, "because we've changed something fundamental today. We've shown billions of people across the galaxy that there's an alternative to abandonment, that someone cares enough to help. And once people see that alternatives exist, they start demanding them." Kethara looked down at her world where the blue skies were growing clearer every day and the first new crystal formations were beginning to sing with renewed life. 6 months ago, they'd been dying alone, forgotten by the galaxy. Now they were part of something larger. A revolution built on the simple principle that every life mattered. "The Korvani have a saying," she told the humans who'd saved her world and shown her people that they weren't alone. "The song of one crystal is beautiful, but the symphony of many crystals can reshape mountains." Captain Chen nodded, understanding the metaphor. "Then let's compose a symphony, Kethara. Let's teach the galaxy a new song, one where no one is left to sing alone in the darkness." As Liberty Station continued its orbit around their restored world, Kethara realized that they'd accomplished something even more important than saving Corvith. They'd proven that the Forsaken could become the unforgettable, that the abandoned could become the inevitable, and that sometimes the most powerful revolution is simply refusing to accept that anyone is expendable. The Free Worlds Alliance had begun as a desperate cry for help from a dying world, but it had become something the galaxy would never forget. Proof that when people who care about each other decide to stand together, they can change the universe itself. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had been written off and people who had been forgotten, the message was spreading. No one was alone anymore. Someone was listening. Someone was coming. The age of abandonment was ending. The age of accountability had begun. We were forsaken by the galaxy. Then a human ship appeared. HFY. Sci-Fi.